Hello, today I'm going to be doing something that no one has ever done before. I'm going to be ranking all of the Beatles albums. I know it's a shocker to many that I'm doing this because, no one's ever thought of doing something like this before in the entire history of anything. So I'm going to be the first, and I'm pretty proud that I'm the first to do this. So it's very exciting for me. I've listened to all of the albums, all of the singles released while the band was formed, and I did that over the course of a year, and I thought that was a really cool experience because that was the first time I've ever listened from start to finish all of the Beatles catalog, and I figured, you know what, I'm going to give myself about a month in between each album to, take in all the songs. I would definitely recommend doing this if you haven't done it or if you've never listened to the Beatles before. I think it's worth the time and effort to go through, set aside a year, and, go through each album per month, because I was personally astounded going through just over the course of the year. I was like, they started from Please Please Me and ended up here within a couple months. Like, by the time I got to Revolver, I was like, this is only 3 years after, or was it 3 or 4 years after Please Please Me? I was like, this is insane. Anyway, let's get on with the rankings. So this is not the cover for the White Album, but this is where all of the album covers will go in this box here. But I'm just going to go through and give my thoughts on each of the albums, and these are ranked in order. I don't have a number in front of me because, honestly, I feel like that's kind of pointless because a lot of these albums I can change in and out. First off, probably no surprise to anyone, and this is probably the one that's at the bottom for everyone that has done one of these lists, is the Yellow Submarine album. This is mostly just forgettable. It's completely forgettable, really. The only highlights off of this album would be Hey Bulldog and It's All Too Much. Those are really the only two songs that I really like off the album. Especially the new songs. I think there's another George song on here, I think. I might be thinking of Magical Mystery Tour. I was going to say Blue Jay Way, but I think that's on Magical Mystery Tour. So we'll get to that later. But only half of the album is Beatles material, and only like 4 songs are new on here. So you have half of it is Beatles material, and the other half is George Martin's orchestral arrangements for the movie Yellow Submarine. And while they're great songs and they're great compositions and they're well composed, they're great. It just doesn't make any sense with the rest of the Beatles catalog. And George Martin has his place in other Beatles songs, and he does that well, but here on its own, it doesn't make sense with the rest of it, unfortunately. All right, next up, I think a lot of people are probably going to be surprised that I have this album this low, because I think I've seen some other people's album rankings, and they usually have this album a little bit higher than I do. But to me, this album feels mostly just like filler material. Like, I think they had all their best material ready to go for Please Please Me, and they used it all up there. And this one, their second album, they just were like, all right, this is what we have left over that we didn't put on the first album. There's not really much memorable here for me. I don't really come back to this album at all. I don't think about it very much. There's only really 2 songs on here that I like. And that's It Won't Be Long and Money That's What I Want, which is a cover, so that's not saying very much for this album. The other stuff isn't horrible, but it's just mostly forgettable for me, so that's why I don't have this very high at all on my list. Next up, probably another big shocker to some people, is A Hard Day's Night. I do want to say that I really overlooked this on the first listen, the first time I listened to this. I think it has a lot of great stuff on here, but it's just a little, I don't know, just something about it doesn't sit well with me. It's not really, I don't enjoy it as much as other albums. It's just kind of like, all right, it's nothing spectacular to me. But despite me saying that, there are some great songs on here, like A Hard Day's Night. I also really like Anytime at All, and You Can't Do That. Those are my 3 favorite songs on the album. Those are my highlights for this album. So, it's not horrible. It's not all bad. There are great songs on here that I didn't even name in the highlights that I like, but those are the 3 main that I go to when I think of this album. Okay, next up is, I'm a little ashamed that I like this album as much as I do, but I think it has some great songs on here. Honestly, I think there's some really great songs on here. But I will admit, it feels like they're a little burnt out on this album. It feels like they're probably burnt out from touring, and this is like when Beatlemania really was at its peak, I think. So it feels like they're taking a step back and just chilling out a little bit. But despite that, I think there's some great songs on here. You got No Reply, which I really like. 8 Days a Week, which is the like big song off this album. What You're Doing is a standout for me because I think it sounds a lot like something that could have fit in well on Rubber Soul, which is the album that came right after this one. This is where you start to see them get a little bit more personal with John's I'm a Loser, where he's kind of looking at himself and is talking about how maybe he has some, his self-confidence isn't all there. But next is the debut album. I think this is a fantastic debut. While I don't like all the songs on here, I think that the album flows very well. And I don't hate anything on here. It's just that some songs I like more and they stand out a lot more than others. But overall, as an entire album, I think that this is a fantastic debut album. One of my favorite songs on here that I picked out on my first listen that I really loved and is still one of my most played Beatles songs to this day, Do You Want to Know a Secret? I think that song is fantastic. And I didn't even realize that George sung lead on it until months after I first listened to this album and the song. Other songs I like, Misery, that's a great one. And I Saw Her Standing There, the big hit, I think, besides Please Please Me. Not much more to say about that than that, but, great stuff on the debut. I mean, if you have a great debut, that's a good sign. That's a good sign for the Beatles there. Help. With John's songwriting on Help, I think that's prime example of the evolution of John's songwriting here, getting more personal and being able to use his own experiences more in his songwriting. Really opens up, I think, for other stuff in the future that he ends up writing. That and Yesterday, I think, are both prime examples of the great songwriting that was yet to come. It's like they're two, I think, the two greatest songs that they had written to this point, Help and Yesterday. On a side note, I have seen the movie Help, that this is a soundtrack to, and gotta say, movie, not really a fan of, didn't make any sense at all, really. Alright, moving on to Revolver. This is an incredible album. I think a lot of people have this up way higher than I do, but a lot of my ranking comes down to the fact like how much I enjoy all of the songs on here as a whole almost. And this has a lot of great songs, but it doesn't have the most songs that I enjoy. You can say this about a lot of albums, a lot of the previous albums, but I think it makes sense most with this album that without this album, none of the other albums that they would make afterwards would exist or even be close to what they were. Because I feel like this album set the groundwork for the future albums for the Beatles to lead on song production, like taking over and saying like, oh no, I think that this needs to be this or whatever, whatever. Like we need to get an orchestral section here, just stuff like that. I think this is what really set in motion that kind of mindset for the future albums. Also, this is a great album because it gives some spotlight to George on here with Taxman and Love You Too, where he's experimenting with some more classical Indian music on there. It's really cool to hear. I do have to say that I do have one main gripe with this. I don't know if it's only on Spotify where I mainly listen to this album, but on Eleanor Rigby, there's a part where I think it's in the chorus. I can't remember for sure, but Paul's vocals only are in like one ear, and then they like switch over to the other, and it's not in a clean spot at all. It's like halfway through him speaking, it switches. It doesn't make any sense. It's very distracting. For that reason, I avoid listening to this song on this album, which sucks because it's a great song otherwise. But if I'm going to listen to Eleanor Rigby, I'm listening to it on, one of the compilations or something, because that's more pleasant to listen to. The highlights on this album for me are For No One. That's probably one of my favorite Beatles songs up to this point in their catalog for sure. This is one of my also top played songs from the Beatles overall. She Said is also a great one from John. And as I said before, Taxman from George is also fantastic. And it's the first album, and I think only album, that George has the first song in the track list. So he got one here, and that was it, I think. All right, next up we have Magical Mystery Tour, which is weird because, that I'm ranking it this high, I think, because it's not even intended to be an album, really, for when it was made. Because, it was released as an EP, and then Capitol, I think, just attached a bunch of singles that they hadn't released in the US yet to make this album. But it just has a really great track list. There's so many songs on here that are just phenomenal. You have Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny Lane, you have I Am the Walrus. It's just, you can't really deny that these songs are incredible. I like to think of it as essentially Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band 2, because I feel like a lot of these songs could have replaced some songs on there, which I'll get to when we get to Sgt Pepper's. But I also think this is some of John's best songwriting up to this point. So that's Magical Mystery Tour. So yeah, right after that we have Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And this is easily the most unique of all the Beatles albums, I have to say. This album, I feel like, is also unique, not in just the aspect that it's like they're basically a fake band here playing all these songs and trying to do like different things that they would have never done. But I feel like this album, it's really Paul's album, and I think it's well known that he like had a huge hand in suggesting they do this. I think that's just an interesting thing, and I love a lot of Paul's music past the Beatles. Going into this, I would think that I would like this album. This would be like one of my favorite albums, but I do have a lot of problems with it because it's not one album. It's not one of the albums that I would go back to and listen to all the way through. It's not as enjoyable to listen from front to back to me. Despite that, there are a lot of great songs on here. You have With a Little Help from My Friends. It's like the second track on there. Incredible start. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Lovely Rita, Getting Better. But then you have a bit of a dud with When I'm 64. I just don't like it. When I'm 64 could have been replaced by practically any of the songs on Magical Mystery Tour for the better. That's the one change that I would make here. And I guess I can't neglect A Day in the Life. Incredible song, but it's just not one that I come back to very often. I'll be honest. I just don't go back to A Day in the Life as often as I do with the rest of these songs. So that's why it's not in my highlights on this album, but it is a very great song. Next up, we have the White Album, The Beatles, self-titled. This is an incredible album because it just has a wide variety of songs. It's all over the place, and it benefits greatly from that. From the incredibly emotional and touching songs to, just completely goofy and off-the-wall songs. You go from Julia to Revolution 9, and it's just like this doesn't make any sense for this to be by the same band, let alone on the same album, but there it is. Not to say that I'm a fan of Revolution 9, because I'm not. It has its place, it's there, it's a part of the album, but I'd be hard pressed to find, I think, many people who would say that Revolution 9 is one of their favorite Beatles songs. But on top of that, this is like one of the albums where George really shines his best. This is where he has the most room to show off, because it's already a double album. So he's got the most amount of songs, I think, on any album up to this point, and maybe of all the albums, if I'm not correct. But yeah, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Savoy Truffle. And I'd like to point out, Not Guilty, while it's not on this album, it was an outtake and cut from the album. Later a solo release on, I think, his self-titled album in 79. I'm not sure, I haven't listened to the album yet, but I have heard Not Guilty the cut version recorded during the White Album sessions, and this is an incredible song. I really don't quite understand why this was cut. This was reportedly one of the last songs to be cut before the White Album was finalized, and I think that was a mistake. It's one of the songs on here should have been cut. Like, why don't we do it on the road? That could have gone. Bye-bye. That could have gone. Put Revolution 9 out of there and replace it with Not Guilty, because that's an incredible song. And I think it personally deserves a space on the White Album. My highlights for this album are too many songs to list really here, but my favorites, if I have to pick, Back in the USSR, Glass Onion, Obla Di Obla Da, Julia, like I said before. Martha My Dear is also great. I come back to that song so much. A lot of the songs on this album are just fantastic. Just great. Great. Those are just great songs. What more do I have to say than that? And next up, we have Let It Be, which I'm even surprised by myself by how high I have placed this and how much I actually do like this album. A lot of people don't like Spector's production on here, and I kind of agree. It's a little bit overdone, but I'm going to be honest, I kind of agree with what John said with this is probably like Spector probably did the best he could with what they had, because it wasn't technically like a finished album. It was like leftover recordings. So I can't imagine how much work went into trying to get these songs to be as polished as they ended up here. So I do have to applaud him for that. I do have to say, I agree with Paul on The Long and Winding Road. I don't really like the orchestral arrangement on there. There are arguments to be had whether or not it makes sense for Paul to be mad at it, because he got the copy of the album and he approved it. So it's kind of like, well, Paul, what happened there? Did you like it or did you hate it? What happened? You could have said something there. But regardless of that, I still think it's a great song. But I just can't listen to it really with the orchestral arrangements on there, and I'll probably enjoy it a lot more once I get around to listening to the naked version of the album that came out in like 2004 or 2003, I think. I don't know. I'll listen to that, and I'm looking forward to whenever they release a box set for this for the 50th, or I guess it'll be 51st, since they kind of neglected that in 2020 due to COVID. My other gripe with this album is that, going into it, they were going to do a live performance, and they did on the rooftop, but that's not really what ended up on the album. Like, this isn't the rooftop performance album. This is an album with some performances from the rooftop concert, but that's not what this is. So I think that they should have dropped that completely for this. And by drop it, I mean, if you're going to use some performances from the rooftop concert, that's fine. But I think that this album could have done without the studio chatter, because it's just an imitation of what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be a live album, and adding in the studio chatter in between songs, just, I don't know, I could do without it. The highlights for this album, I like a lot of the songs on here. Pretty much almost all the songs on this album I think are great. But the highlights for me are Let It Be, One After 909, I've Got a Feeling, Two of Us, and I Me Mine. Great songs, all great songs there. And here is Rubber Soul. This is easily my favorite album from the early years, if you want to call it that, like the first 6 albums. Is what I think of when I think of like the early years for the Beatles. But yeah, this is where I feel like they transformed from the standard pop rock act that they were doing into like truly amazing, incredible songwriters. This is where I feel like they really were able to say, all right, let's try to see what we can do here, what we can like push, what's the next thing. They were trying to see what else they could do instead of saying like, all right, what if we change a little thing? They're like, what if we try something a little more different here? And then right after this, they did Revolver. So I think they were, they were on the right track here. But yeah, almost every song on here has incredible lyrics and melodies that are just, I mean, almost every song on here gets stuck in my head when I think of it. Also, George has some great songs on here. A highlight for me, If I Needed Someone, incredible song. That one was stuck in my head for days and weeks after I heard it for the first time. But other than that, you have Norwegian Wood. That's a huge highlight for me. Think for Yourself, Nowhere Man. Norwegian Wood stands out for me as well because this is the first sitar performance on a Beatles song. So, and you wouldn't think that it would work, but it just does. It's perfect. And finally, my number one. This is the one that I will say is number one. Abbey Road. I really have almost no gripes with this album at all. I think it's pretty much perfect. Words cannot describe how much I love this album just on the first listen. I remember just being amazed at the medley at the end of the album. I was like, this is amazing. Particularly, I remember listening to She Came In the Bathroom Window the first time when that lead guitar came in. I just descended. I was like, this is incredible. It's like once in a lifetime feeling that you can get from a song. I can't describe it. I just can't describe the feeling I had while I was listening to that. I wouldn't do a highlights, but honestly, the whole album is a highlight. But if I were to pick like my favorite songs outside of the medley, I'd say Here Comes the Sun, I Want You, She's So Heavy, Maxwell Silver Hammer, Oh Darling, Come Together. So there again, I'm just listening to all the songs. I do have a least favorite though. I will admit, even though it's my least favorite, I still think it's great. But if I had to rank all the songs, I wouldn't have a problem putting Because last. But every other song after that, I would be like, okay, I don't know how to rank these from one another. I feel like they're all on their own. They're all on a level playing field here. They're all great. Like I wouldn't be able to say if Oh Darling is better than Polythene Pam. I'd be like, these are both incredible songs. I can't put one above the other. All right, that's the album ranking. So I'm currently going through all of these solo albums now, and I'm just going at my own pace. You know, I was saying that I went through the Beatles discography 1 month at a time for each album. But this one I'm doing like, you know, whenever I feel like listening to the next one. So this will take me forever to do. So I'm going to try and think of a way to talk about these albums as I'm listening to them. Maybe I'll do like album rankings 1970 to 74, I don't know, something like that. I'll have to figure it out, but I'll do something about that because I really like those albums as well. The solo albums are just as worth the time as the regular Beatles albums. So that'll be it for this video. If you subscribe based on this video, I'm very sorry about the other content that I'm going to be posting on here because it's not going to be like this at all. So, sorry.